St. Paul was among the first Christians to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ in written form. He did so by responding to the issues and concerns in communities where he ministered, which faced both periods of relative calm and periods of great turmoil. Paul sought to interpret it all in the light of God's plan of salvation. He traveled much of the then-known world, announcing a church that was not just for the righteous, but for all, that is, a universal church. His wholehearted acceptance of God's grace in his efforts and his commitment to use that grace fully empowered him. Paul's letters convey a person who was deeply committed to being for others what they needed most. In this great endeavor, he gave us much of the vocabulary we still use today to articulate, for others and ourselves, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We learn about Paul from Luke's Acts of the Apostles and from Paul's letters. There are 13 documents attributed to St. Paul that have survived and that are now part of the New Testament. As we will learn, quite a few scholars contend that some of these letters were not actually written by Paul, but by disciples of Paul. In this book, we will touch on some of the arguments for and against Paul's having written those letters. Further, next only to Jesus, Paul has been the most influential figure in the history of Christianity. The range and depth of his thought and his passionate involvement with those to whom he wrote have left no Christian unaffected by what Paul wrote. So we should expect that there will be disagreement over the interpretation of certain passages in his letters. It's important to recognize that the Gospels, which were written in story form, often engender spontaneous attraction. But trying to decipher a number of passages in Paul's letters can be quite daunting for many people. So, if you first absorb the material in this brief guide, you are more apt to appreciate Paul, the man who did more than anyone else in history to lead people to see what Jesus Christ means to the world. It may be helpful for the listener to have a Bible on hand when listening to this book. You will find that Paul was a man of great intensity, who was capable of generating deep friendships. Paul's letters give evidence of extraordinary loyalty. A lasting appreciation of him and his theology flowed from the quills of those who, remaining anonymous, wrote for him and in his name. Today, there is a vast amount of literature on St. Paul and his writings, and this corpus continues to grow each year. So one might reasonably ask, why this book? Well, between the many volumes of scholarly works and the even larger number of commentaries on Paul, there appears to be a need for a brief guide for the many Christians who are not scholarly, yet thirst for a better understanding of St. Paul, his theology, and his letters. The purpose of this book, which is intentionally brief, is to fulfill that need, and so I will focus primarily on those passages people find most difficult to understand.